Today is the 7th day of the June-July 85 7-day retreat. I will read from the writings or teaching of Huang as translated by John Blofeld. It will give us a change of vocabulary and words and way of putting things. Huang Po is not brought in on every 7th day of a retreat to invoke the final authority. It's quite a relief to take a nap before talk and not have to wonder what I'm going to talk about. That book is there. Huang Po was a Zen teacher, lived in the 9th century in China. He was the abbot of a Zen monastery. His language and vocabulary are traditional Buddhist. Some of the words, like Dharma, I've translated as truth or teaching. The word Buddha refers either to the historical person or to truth, enlightenment, an enlightened being. There are many phrases, words, paragraphs, pages that are left out. Sort of an edited version for the sake of clarity. We've read it many times, listened to it many times before, and it's vital not to listen with a mind of memory, which says, yeah, now he's going to say that. Then one is in a very limited realm of the mind of recognition. Rather to listen with an openness that hears as for the first time, even if recognition is taking place, not to fall into that groove of humming along. These words were spoken, they were written down by a disciple of Huang Po's, and then they underwent translation. But they were spoken not to add to our repertoire of phrases and words and concepts, but to free of that and to see directly, to listen immediately. With no mold imposed upon what is heard. The Master said to me, all the Buddhas and all sentient beings are nothing but the one mind, beside which nothing exists. This mind which is without beginning is unborn and indestructible. It is not green nor yellow and has neither form nor appearance. It does not belong to the categories of things which exist or do not exist, nor can it be thought of in terms of young or old. It is neither long nor short, big nor small, for it transcends all limits, measures, names, traces, and comparisons. It is that which you see before you. Begin to reason about it, and you at once fall into error. The error of duality, the reasoner and what he reasons about. It is like the boundless void which cannot be fathomed or measured. The one mind alone is the Buddha, and there is no distinction between the Buddha and sentient beings, but that sentient beings are attached to forms and so seek externally for Buddhahood. By their very seeking, they lose it, for that is using mind to grasp mind. Even though they do their utmost for a full eon, they will not be able to attain to it. They do not know that if they put a stop to conceptual thought and forget their anxiety, it will appear before them. For this mind is the Buddha, and the Buddha is all living beings. It is not the less for being manifested in ordinary beings, nor is it greater for being manifested in the Buddhas. At another time, Huang says, full understanding can come to you only through an inexpressible mystery. The approach to it is called the gateway of the stillness beyond all activity. If you wish to understand, know that a sudden comprehension comes when the mind is purged of all the clutter of conceptual and discriminatory thought activity. Those who seek the truth by means of intellect and learning only get further and further away from it. Not till your thoughts cease all their branching here and there, not till you abandon all thoughts of seeking for something, not till your mind is motionless as wood or stone will you be on the right road. Which means not to fight thought with thought. Let thought come and go like the clouds in the sky. With no doer trying to control them, suppress them, obliterate them, or attach to them. Here the questioner says, at this very moment all sorts of erroneous thoughts are constantly flowing through our minds. How can you speak of our having none? And Huang says, error has no substance. It is entirely the product of your own thinking. If you know that mind is fundamentally without error, whenever thoughts arise, you will clearly see that they are responsible for errors. If you could prevent all conceptual movement of thought and still your thinking processes, naturally there would be no error left in you. Therefore it is said, when thoughts arise, then do all things arise. When thoughts vanish, then do all things vanish. the thought arises, how can I make all my thoughts vanish, then do all things arise? Ambition, striving, success and failure. And the image of the successful one or the failing one. The questioner goes on, at this moment, while erroneous thoughts are arising in my mind, where is the Buddha? And Huang says, among other things, perhaps you can understand that were you but free of these delusory mental processes, there would then be no Buddha. Why so? Because when you allow a movement of your mind to result in a concept of the Buddha, you're bringing into existence an objective being capable of being enlightened. Let's read this again because it's still in people's minds, this thing of having to attain enlightenment, having to become a Buddha. It's not put in those words, but having to attain enlightenment, the desire for enlightenment is so deeply rooted if one has been deeply trained at a place where this was impressed upon one daily. At this moment, while erroneous thoughts are arising in my mind, where is the Buddha? And the answer is, perhaps you can understand that were you but free of these delusory mental processes, there would then be no Buddha. Why so? Because when you allow a movement of your mind to result in a concept of the Buddha or of enlightenment, you're bringing into existence an objective being capable of being enlightened. If you were to refrain from conceptualizing altogether, where could the Buddha continue to exist? And the questioner proceeds at a later moment. At the moment of enlightenment, where is the Buddha? And Huang Po says, whence does your question arise? I mean, where does it come from? Whence does your consciousness arise? What's the root of it, the source of it? And then he says, when speech is silenced, all movement stilled, every sight and sound vanished, then the work of deliverance is truly going on. Then where will you seek the Buddha? You cannot place a head upon your head or lips upon your lips. Rather, can you refrain from every kind of dualistic distinction? Hills are hills, water is water, monks are monks, laymen are laymen. But these mountains, these rivers, the whole world itself, together with sun, moon, and stars, not one of them exists outside of your minds, or outside of mind, one mind. Better way of putting it, outside of your minds means, oh, it just exists in my mind. There is nothing there. It's an illusion. It's not an illusion when you run into a tree with your head. Then later on the questioner says, assuming all this is so, what particular state is connoted by the word bodhi? Bodhi is a Sanskrit word for enlightenment or supreme wisdom. So what state does this word Bodhi refer to? And Huang Po says Bodhi is no state. The Buddha did not attain it. Sentient beings do not lack it. It cannot be reached with a body nor sought with a mind. And the question that comes back, but how does one attain to this Bodhi mind? And Huang Po, Bodhi is not something to be attained. If at this very moment you could convince yourself of its unattainability, because convincing oneself that would be more, I don't know what the Chinese was, this would be more mentation. Either you convince yourself of its attainability or you convince yourself of its unattainability. It's both mentation, thought. It's to see the whole movement of wanting to attain as a movement away from where one is. This instant of no time. All this attainment is connected with the manufacturing of mind, of time, by thought. Away from this instant of no time. If you could convince yourselves of its unattainability, being certain indeed that nothing at all can ever be attained, because it's thought, in the future, which is thought. Then you would already be Bodhi-minded. And this would already be wisdom, intelligence, freedom from this ancient compulsion to attain something or to become something, somebody. He says again, since Bodhi is not a state, it is nothing for you to attain. And therefore it is written of Gautama Buddha, quote, there was not a grain of anything to be attained by me. Later Huang Po says, you may recently have heard others talking about this, quote, attaining of the Bodhi mind, unquote. But this may be called an intellectual way of driving Buddha away. By following this method, you only appear to achieve Buddhahood. Seeking outside for Buddha possessed of form has nothing to do with you. Later on, Huang Po says, in reality, truth is neither preached in words nor otherwise signified. And those who listen neither hear nor attain. It is as though an imaginary teacher had preached to imaginary people. As regards all these teachings, if for the sake of the way I speak to you from my deeper understanding, you will certainly be able to understand what I say. And as to mercy and compassion, if for your sakes I took to theorizing and conceptualizing and studying other people's concepts, in neither case will you have reached a true perception of the real nature of your own. of your own mind from within. So in the end, these things will be of no help at all. At another point, the questioner says, what is the meaning of zealous application? And Huang says, the most completely successful form of zealous application is the absence from your minds of all such distinctions as my body or my mind. How then does a man accomplish this comprehension of his own mind? How then does a man accomplish this comprehension of his own mind? And Huang says, that which asked the question is your own mind. But if you were to remain quiescent and to refrain from the smallest mental activity, its substance would be seen as void. You would find it formless, occupying no point in space, and falling neither into the category of existence or into that of non-existence. Mind, or it is the unbegotten and indestructible womb. In response to circumstances, it transforms itself into phenomena. For the sake of convenience, we speak of mind as the intelligence. But when it does not respond to circumstances, it cannot be spoken of in such dualistic terms as existence or non-existence. Later on he says, there is no self and no other. There is no, in quotes, wrong desire, no, in quotes, anger, no, in quotes, hatred, no like, no victory, no failure. Meaning conceptualizing about oneself, making something into, crystallizing it through a word, through a label, through recognition, and then reacting to what one has labeled and remembered as being anger or failure, or wrong desire, right desire. All conceptualization away from what's actually vibrantly taking place this instant. Seeing it and leaving it. Not making a thing out of it. Through all our internal verbalization and comparison and interpretations, becoming interesting to oneself. Or abominable. He says, only renounce the error of intellectual or conceptual thought processes and your nature will exhibit its pristine purity. Unless you understand this, the whole of your great learning, this disciple was a scholar, the whole of your great learning, your painful efforts to advance, your austerities of diet and clothing will not help you to a knowledge of your own mind. All such practices must be termed fallacious. What end is served by pursuits like those? Later on he says, as it is, so long as your mind is subject to the slightest movement of conceptual thought, you will remain engulfed in the error of taking, quote, ignorant, unquote, and enlightened, in quotes, for separate states. This error will persist regardless of your vast knowledge of the Mahayana or your ability to pass through the 4 gates or grades of sainthood. This is all in quotation marks. This must all be outlined steps of progression along the path. The 10 stages of progress leading to enlightenment, unquote. For all these pursuits belong to what is ephemeral. Even the most strenuous of your efforts is doomed to fail, just as an arrow shot ever so high into the air must inevitably fall spent to the ground. Later on he says, were you now to keep your minds motionless, whether walking, standing, sitting, or lying, no duality, no reliance on others, no attachments, just allowing all things to take their course the whole day long, as though you were too ill to bother. This doesn't mean a lethargical way of living. This metaphor of relating to things which come toward us as too ill to bother, meaning when one is really ill, a high fever or lots of pain, the body doesn't waste 1 ounce of energy, neither does the mind. One is still with the state. One unnecessary movement of the body or mind is too much. And there's an inherent wisdom at work. The wisdom of conserving energy. If one would just for 1 day watch the amount of reactions that take place to what other people do, say, don't do, to oneself, to how things are run around one. Constant reaction, which is all the fuel is running. So he says here, just allowing all things to take their course the whole day long as though you were too ill to bother. Which doesn't mean, of course, please not to interpret this that if one goes to work and has to build a cabinet, one doesn't react because one is too ill to bother. No, I don't think anybody interprets. We do need to respond. Not we need it. Response comes naturally when one isn't so concerned with one's likes and dislikes and needs and no needs. When one is just healthy, albeit. If one is not healthy, needs sleep or rest or a cure, then one's responsiveness is impaired. But to respond to what's there before one is not the same as to react. Reaction has ingredients of my positioning. The establishment of myself there. What I want to see happen, how I want to be treated, and so forth. Innocent of any urge to be known or unknown to others, This was this whole list of how to live all day, which mustn't become a list one hangs above one's mirror, trying to follow that. It's not something to be followed. It's something to be seen, how one does in fact live one's daily life. Is there an urge to be known, one could say, or to be unknown? But he continues and says, if this were the case, living like this, innocent of all these urges and reactions and stuff, then the truth would penetrate your understanding through and through. Because then there would be openness, there would be nothing blocking the channels. Thus, for the first time in your lives, he says, you would discover your reactions to phenomena or to people decreasing. Later on he says, hence all teachings as those purporting to lead to the attainment of enlightenment possess no reality. The words of Gautama Buddha were intended merely as efficacious expedients for leading men out of the darkness of worse ignorance. It was as though one pretended yellow leaves were gold to stop the flow of a child's tears. Samyak Sambodhi, this means supreme knowledge, a concept, a Buddhist concept. Supreme knowledge is another name for the realization that there are no valid teachings. Once you understand this, of what use are such trifles to you? According harmoniously with the conditions of your present lives, go on as opportunities arise, and above all, avoid building up a fresh store of retribution for yourselves, which happens when we're inattentive. When we make a mess and then we have to wipe it up. Feel regrets and so forth. Which is all right too, if one can drop it. Or, let's put it not dualistically, because there's no one to drop something. If it can drop in a moment of fresh being, fresh responding, fresh listening and seeing, free from what happened yesterday. And the amazing thing is that a fresh listening, where the energy is there and the attention disconnects from the past, it does that. That's the miracle. It does pull the plug out. Without any intention, it happens. Because when one listens or attends or sees wholly all senses there as one, then there's no room for all this past stuff. It's disconnected. The energies don't flow into the memory. They're here. He says here, truth is never lost even in moments of delusion, nor is it gained at the moment of enlightenment. It depends on nothing and is attached to nothing. You can also add, it is caused by nothing. It is not part of this whole cause and effect thing. It is all-pervading, spotless beauty. It is the self-existent and uncreated absolute. It is the jewel beyond all price. Hearing that, does one immediately want that jewel? That can be seen. Just as the wind in the trees can be heard. And can seeing sweep away wanting? Not with effort, not with a vengeance. Just that it happens that way. Here's a story. Once, when our master had just dismissed the first of the daily assemblies, I happened to enter its precincts. Presently I noticed a wall painting and, by questioning the monk in charge, learned that it portrayed a certain famous monk. Indeed, I said, yes, I can see his likeness before me, but where is the man himself? My question was received in silence. So I remarked, but surely there are monks here in this temple, aren't there? Yes, replied the administrator, there is one. After that, I requested an audience with the master and repeated to him my recent conversation. Paiseux, cried the master. Sir, I answered respectfully, where are you? Realizing that no reply was possible to such a question, I hastened to ask our master to re-enter the hall and continue his sermon. Rather listen to a little bit more talk than question who one is. Always want to see all the famous people. At one point he says, if ever you should allow yourselves to believe in the more than purely transitory existence of phenomena, you will have fallen into a grave error. But if, on the contrary, you take the intrinsic voidness of phenomena to imply mere emptiness, then you will have fallen into another error. Later he says, how is it possible that Gautama Buddha could have originated the present conceptions of enlightenment? But as these doctrines are still commonly taught, people become involved in the duality of longing for light and, it's a word I never know how to pronounce, eschewing darkness. Is that the right way of pronouncing? Eschewing? In their anxiety to seek enlightenment on the one hand and to escape from the passions and ignorance of corporal existence on the other, they conceive of an enlightened Buddha and unenlightened sentient beings as separate entities. Let me assure you again that the Buddha dwells not in light, nor sentient beings in darkness, for the truth allows of no such distinctions. The Buddha is not mighty, nor sentient beings feeble, for the truth allows no such distinctions. The Buddha is not enlightened and sentient beings ignorant, for the truth allows no distinctions. This is all because you take it upon yourself to talk of explaining Zen. And later he says again, above all, have no longing to become a future Buddha. Your sole concern should be, as thought succeeds thought, to avoid clinging to any of them. This is a little bit more accessible than his other talk of being completely without thought. But there he means this conceptualizing about enlightenment and achievement and attainment and all of that, or conceptualizing all of the scripture readings one has done, because this man here is a scholar of scriptures. But here he says, your sole concern should be, let's put it the other way around, can your sole concern be, leave out all the shoulds, and just become another barrier, another good occasion to compare oneself with others, or with how one should be, which is more mentation. So can your sole concern be, as thought succeeds thought, to avoid clinging to any of them? And he goes on again, nor may you entertain the least ambition to be a Buddha here and now. Even if a Buddha arises, do not think of him as enlightened or deluded, good or evil. Hasten to rid yourself of any desire to cling to him. Cut him off in the twinkling of an eye. On no account seek to hold him fast, for 1,000 locks could not stay him, nor 100,000 feet of rope bind him. This being so valiantly strive to banish and annihilate him. Then he goes on, he says, I will now make luminously clear how to set about being rid of that Buddha. Consider the sunlight. You may say it is near, yet if you follow it from world to world, you will never catch it in your hands. Then you may describe it as far away, and lo, you will see it just before your eyes. Follow it, and behold, it escapes you. Run from it, and it follows you close. You can neither possess it nor have done with it. From this example you can understand how it is with the true nature of all things, and henceforth there will be no need to grieve or worry about such things. And then he goes on, beware of going on to say that my recommendation to cut off the Buddha was profane, nor that my comparing him to the sunshine was pious. He's also concerned a little bit what people will say about what he has said and the reactions, and it's always extra energy for all of us. But if it happens, it happens. Yeah, he's trying to anticipate something. Now beware of going on to say that my recommendation to cut off the Buddha was profane, or that my comparing him to the sunshine was pious, as though I had wavered from one extreme to the other. Followers of the other sects would then agree with you, but I will not admit either the profanity of the first nor the pious quality of the second. At one point, Pei Su asks, what is implied by seeing into the real nature? That's in quotation marks. What is implied by seeing into the real nature, or into truth? And Huang Po says that nature and the perception of it are one. You cannot use it to see something over and above itself. That nature and your hearing of it are one. Cannot use it to hear something over and above itself or yourself. If you form a concept of the true nature of anything as being visible or audible, you allow a division to arise. Let me repeat that the perceived cannot perceive. Can there, I ask you, be a head attached to the crown of your head? And this final statement in this book, but how can we prevent ourselves from falling into the error of making distinctions between this and that? And the answer, by realizing that though you eat the whole day through, no single grain has passed your lips, and that a whole day's journey has not taken you a single step. Has not taken you a single step forward, he says. Forward and backward are in relation to measurements, space, time. But when there's no measurement, when there's no division, no separation, then there's also nothing in between. And there's no from here to there. That's thought, but not reality. He goes on also by uniformly abstaining from such notions as self and other. This whole matter of abstaining sounds like, don't say that, don't think that way, abstain from it. But if abstaining means to see what self is and what other is, are they concepts? Are they enclosure? Concern within the cocoon? And maybe concern for something outside of the cocoon, but still from within the cocoon. He goes on, do not permit the events of your daily lives to bind you, but never withdraw yourselves from them. Avoid the error of thinking in terms of past, present, and future. The past has gone. The present is a fleeting moment. The future is yet to come. And he says here, the original translation says, when you practice mind control. I don't know where that comes from. Never has Huang Po ever before talked about mind control. Hasn't even talked about practicing. This must be Blofeld's contribution. He says, sit in the proper position, stay perfectly tranquil, and do not permit the least movement of your minds to disturb you. This alone is what is called liberation. Just one remark, the proper position is not sitting alone, not alone sitting. If all of this, what is described here, just happens while sitting, what good is it when one is consumed with reaction the moment one is in relationship? So what is the proper position in relationship? Just to use that phrase here, that term. Or is it the absence of all position? We will end here for today.